Chelsea beat Tottenham 3-0 this weekend, and it was really a cliche game. A game of two halves that saw Tottenham surprisingly nullify and create a number of chances early on in that first half against Chelsea. But Thomas Tuchel made some excellent changes after 45 minutes after the break that saw them dominate and prove again why they're seen by many as the title favourites this season. We're going to delve into what was going right for Spurs and wrong for Chelsea in that first half, but also the subtle differences made, the adaptation of the formation, the change of personnel, and Nuno's inability to counter the brilliance of Thomas Tuchel. Smash that like button. Please subscribe to the Football Terrace now. Turn on that bell notification button. Let's do this. Tottenham started the game with a three-man midfield. Højbjerg, Dele Alli and Ndombele outnumbered Jorginho and Kovacic in the middle. This enabled Spurs to keep a very solid shape outside of possession, press at the right times and go man for man. There was very little room in the half spaces for Chelsea to operate in, and even players such as Jorginho were struggling to find their passing range. This shape here identifies and dictates very clearly the brilliant balance and shape in the opening 45 minutes from Nuno's team. In this sequence, what they're able to do is go man for man and allow very little space and room to manoeuvre. They pressed at the right times, especially in those central areas, making it very difficult for Chelsea to progress the ball into Tottenham's final third of the pitch. Spurs on numerous occasions were winning the ball in those central areas and started and created counter-attacks. In the opening 15 to 20 minutes especially, it looked very likely that Tottenham Hotspur would take the lead, with 5 of Tottenham's 8 shots in the game coming in those first 20 minutes. These were the types of positions Spurs were taking up when winning the ball back. All that really let Tottenham down in that opening period was the final ball or the finishing touch from their players, but the plan was working. This segment here comes from the subsequent goal kick from the previous clips we showed you. Spurs maintain their shape. They're ready to press or drop back depending on the ball that's played by Thiago Silva. They're nullifying the spaces and allowing Chelsea to have very little room. Thomas Tuchel's team love to play out from the back. They do have variation to their game, which we're going to touch on later, but it's very important to remember that as a general rule, they play out from the back. Tottenham was stopping this in the opening periods of the game by having a high line, a solid press, but of course go back to the original point we made, outnumbering the midfield 3-2. The ball was played out by Thiago Silva and won back fairly simplistically by Tottenham. And as you can see, that ball has been won back. Because of the dominance in midfield, the double pivot yesterday was being overrun. If you then look at Harry Kane, Son and Lo Celso, there is a lot of space in between the lines for them. They're now in a situation where if the right ball is played in, they're 3-on-3. This is a very dangerous situation for Chelsea, and they found themselves in this position on numerous occasions. Chelsea managed to recover the situation, Spurs got pushed back, but then again, they find themselves in the half space with the ability to play through. Here, the Chelsea midfield is effectively null and void. The problem that Tottenham had is they just didn't quite click in terms of finding the right runs and right passes. But if the game continued in this manner, with Spurs players sitting in the half spaces and being able to win the ball back too easily from the press, Chelsea may have got on to lose. There's only so long that your defence and your midfield can recover from these mistakes. And then came the change. The substitution of Kante in and Mason Mount off. The shape of Chelsea changed and they took one of their sort of floating 10s off and they put another man in N'Golo Kante in midfield to utilise his press and then to nullify that shape that we saw earlier from Tottenham that was allowing them to sit in the half spaces and in the holes. Chelsea then also pushed their line up further by an extra 10 to 15 yards, making it harder for Tottenham with the lack of pace. Only with Son really that could break those lines from being able to run in behind. But with the speed of Rudiger and the rest of his and the fullbacks, this made it very difficult for Tottenham to penetrate. You then highlight the fact that from the first whistle of that second half, N'Golo Kante started to press and cover the ground in the world-class manner that he always does. This was hurrying Spurs along much more, making them much more urgent. There's more urgency from Tottenham that was allowing for more mistakes from Tottenham very early on. And we saw this throughout the course of the whole game. Him just being an absolute nuisance and a thorn in the side in the second half against Tottenham. We see here the difference in the shape of Chelsea after the N'Golo Kanté substitution and the change of formation from Thomas Tuchel. Spurs still have that same similar shape, but were unable to penetrate the centre. They weren't dominating the middle of proceedings. They were essentially being kept on the ropes and on the peripheries. They were unable to break the lines. The defensive backline, as mentioned, pushed higher and went man for man. But the middle was now solid. The introduction of N'Golo Kanté and the formation change now made it practically impossible for Tottenham's limited passing in the game to break them apart. Spurs moved the ball around nicely in this sequence of play, but Chelsea never broke their shape and at all times maintained at least two players in the central areas of the Tottenham shape. They never allowed themselves to lose their man-for-man marking in terms of their defensive line. They stayed goal side the majority of the time when Spurs were in the attack. And as you can see, you've got Rudiger that's moved into this central area with Jorginho, but at the same time, N'Golo Kanté is moving himself back into this position. This meant for the majority of the second half, Chelsea were left to basically deal with crosses into the box and shots from range from Spurs, as they were unable to break down the Chelsea defensive system. Now, what was really frustrating for Spurs fans is the fact that throughout the whole course of the game, Spurs didn't attempt to change their shape. They may have made some substitutions, but it was the shape and the system that was nullifying Spurs, less so the personnel. Two of Chelsea's goals did come from set pieces, which is excellent from their point of view. But you can see what this formation change did and the introduction of N'Golo Kanté. That high line was then introduced and Chelsea were pressing Spurs much quicker, much faster and much higher up the pitch in that second half. Because they were unable, Tottenham, to then operate in the half spaces because of the introduction of N'Golo Kanté, they found it hard to move the ball. And we can see in this sequence here, N'Golo Kanté finds himself in the central area. He finds himself very, very free in this space here. You've got Rudiger that's coming in to press. And actually, there are very little options for Spurs other than to go on the inside. But you don't really want to be playing, in football as a rule, cross-field passes this deep in your own half. It's absolute suicide. Chelsea win the ball back with their press, and as you can see, N'Golo Kanté is free. The ball hasn't even yet been passed to him, but you can see where he's looking. He's visualizing that space. An area of Kanté's game which is very much undervalued and underrated is his attacking ability when he ventures further forward. Now he receives this ball and is able to run into space because Tottenham by now have stopped pressing. Just 11 minutes into the second half, and the change in Chelsea approach and system has almost befuddled them really. They had no real answers to it. Yes, N'Golo Kanté's subsequent shot takes a big deflection off Eric Dyer. But often in games, that's the luck you deserve by making these positive changes. So a lot of people will focus on the amount of times in the second half Chelsea were able to break down Tottenham, how they countered against them, and how they actually tore them apart. But the most important element of yesterday's game was that subtle change in shape, going from a two-man to a three-man midfield. By adding the extra press, the extra enthusiasm, the extra aggression from N'Golo Kanté, making it difficult for Tottenham to play. The most frustrating element for Spurs fans must be they did not attempt at any moment to make a change in their shape to try and counter what Thomas Tuchel had done. They essentially fell on their sword. But this marks again another game, another moment, another notch on the bedpost as it were, in the brilliance of Thomas Tuchel, his ability to identify where his team were going wrong and make those tactical changes to win another 3 points. Do me a favour and hit that like button. Please subscribe to the Football Terrace. And we'll see you all again very, very soon.